My boyfriend said I was his soulmate, then dumped me for his boss's rich daughter. The engagement photos were timestamped 2 days before Alexander broke up with me. I found them buried in Victoria's Instagram stories while sitting in my Portland apartment, finally understanding why he'd seemed so distracted during our last dinner together. Celebrating 2 years with my soulmate, the caption read, with Alexander spinning her around in some fancy garden I'd never seen before. The kind of garden that screams old money and country club memberships. 2 years meant he'd been with her since we were juniors. 2 years meant every I love you during our senior year had been a complete fabrication. I screenshotted the post before it could disappear, my hands shaking as I realized that while I'd been planning our Portland apartment, he'd been planning his engagement party with someone whose trust fund probably exceeded my family's lifetime earnings. Alexander had looked me in the eyes 2 weeks ago and said we wanted different things in life. Apparently what he wanted was his boss's daughter and access to pharmaceutical industry connections that could set him up for life, which is how I ended up calling his sister Abigail at midnight, demanding to know how long my boyfriend of 4 years had been cheating on me with a pharmaceutical heiress who probably spent more on handbags than I made in 6 months. The phone rang 4 times before Abigail picked up, sounding groggy and confused. Hello? Who is this? It's me, your brother's ex-girlfriend who apparently never knew she was the other woman. I could hear Abigail sitting up in bed, suddenly wide awake. The silence stretched between us like a confession she didn't want to make. I don't know what you're talking about. Victoria Reynolds Hayes, 2 years Abigail. The Instagram post says 2 years. Another long silence. Then Abigail's voice, smaller and guilty. How did you find out? Which is how I knew for certain that everyone in Alexander's family had been complicit in the biggest lie of my adult life. Rewind 1 step. Here's what that spring semester was supposed to look like. I was a senior at State University, double majoring in psychology and communications, living in a cramped off-campus apartment with my roommate Madison, while counting down the days until Alexander and I could start our real adult lives together. We'd been dating since freshman orientation, 4 years of late-night study sessions and shared dreams about the future we were building together. Our apartment was barely 500 square feet with a kitchen so small only one person could cook at a time, but it felt like home because Alexander was there constantly. He'd leave his textbooks stacked on our coffee table, his favorite sweatshirt draped over our couch, his toothbrush next to mine in the tiny bathroom. Madison used to joke that we were practically married already, the way we moved around each other in that cramped space. Alexander was everything I thought I wanted in a life partner. Pre-med track with a 3.9 GPA, incredibly driven about his career goals, and he had this way of making me feel like I was the most fascinating person on earth when he looked at me. We'd spend hours talking about our future plans, mapping out the next 5 years with the confidence of people who'd never experienced real disappointment. We had this routine every Sunday morning where we'd walk to the campus coffee shop and coordinate our schedules. Alexander would pull out his planner, I'd have my phone calendar open, and we'd sync everything from study sessions to date nights to family visits. The coffee shop knew us by name and would start making our usual orders when we walked in. Large dark roast for Alexander, medium vanilla latte for me, and we'd split a blueberry muffin while planning our week. Those Sunday mornings felt like practice for our future together. Alexander would always end these sessions saying something cheesy like, I can't wait to do this in our Portland apartment, or next year we'll be planning our real adult life together. I'd applied for a position at a youth advocacy nonprofit in Portland, and Alexander was planning to take a gap year before applying to medical schools on the West Coast. We'd researched neighborhoods, calculated cost of living, even started a shared savings account for our security deposit. The plan was simple: move across the country together, build careers we cared about, get engaged within a few years. The only detail that should have bothered me earlier was how secretive Alexander had become about his pharmaceutical internship that spring semester. He'd landed this position at Reynolds Pharmaceuticals through his academic advisor, or at least that's what he'd told me. Great pay for an internship, flexible hours that worked with his class schedule, and he claimed it would look incredible on his medical school applications. But whenever I asked about his day at the internship or tried to learn more about his boss and coworkers, he'd give these vague, evasive answers and quickly change the subject to something else. Before the internship, Alexander used to tell me everything about his classes, professors, even mundane details from his campus bookstore job. He'd share stories about difficult customers or funny conversations with coworkers, but with the pharmaceutical internship, everything became fine or busy or the usual. When I'd ask what projects he was working on or who he ate lunch with, he'd give generic answers that sounded rehearsed. I figured he was just being professional and discreet about confidential pharmaceutical research. Medical companies have strict policies about intellectual property, so it made sense that he couldn't discuss specific projects or share internal gossip about coworkers. At first, I brushed off Alexander working longer hours. Medical internships are demanding. Then he started canceling weekend plans more frequently. Saturday study dates became rare. Our Thursday night dinners at the campus diner turned into quick texts about being swamped with work. Our Sunday planning sessions became afternoon catch-ups, then evening check-ins, then nothing at all. When I brought up missing our routine, Alexander said we needed flexibility now that he had real-world responsibilities. I'm doing this for us, he'd say when I mentioned how little time we spent together. This internship could change everything for our future. I believed him because I wanted to support his ambitions. Because when someone you love tells you they're building a foundation for your shared future, you trust that they're being honest about their motivations and methods. The changes in Alexander's behavior were subtle at first, easy to rationalize as normal responses to increased academic and professional pressure. He'd check his phone constantly during our conversations, something he'd never done before in 4 years of dating. He'd receive text messages at weird hours, 10 p.m., 11 p.m., sometimes even later, and would immediately step away to respond privately, instead of just typing a quick reply while we continued talking. He started showering immediately when he came home from the internship, which seemed odd for an office job, but maybe pharmaceutical labs had specific hygiene requirements or chemical exposure protocols. Maybe I was overreacting to normal senior year stress until I noticed he'd stopped talking about Portland entirely. Every time I brought up apartment hunting or our timeline for moving after graduation, he'd get this distant, uncomfortable expression and mutter something vague about keeping options open and not making premature decisions. When I'd show him cute rental listings I'd found online or articles about Portland neighborhoods that seemed perfect for young professionals, he'd barely glance at his phone screen before saying we should wait until after graduation to make any concrete plans. This was completely different from his previous enthusiasm. During junior year, Alexander had researched Portland neighborhoods with me, made spreadsheets comparing job markets, talked about which coffee shops we'd make our regular spots. The sudden disinterest in Portland planning felt like a fundamental shift in his priorities and commitment to our relationship, but I couldn't understand what had changed or why he'd lost enthusiasm for plans we'd been making together for over a year. The first red flag I couldn't ignore happened 3 weeks before graduation. I was at Alexander's apartment, lying on his couch reading for finals while he worked on his laptop at the kitchen table. His phone had been buzzing with text messages messages all evening, and I could see him getting increasingly tense and distracted with each notification. Everything okay? I asked, looking up from my textbook. You seem stressed about something. Just work stuff, he said, but he closed his laptop abruptly and moved to the kitchen island, angling his phone away from me so I couldn't see the screen even if I wanted to. I heard him typing back rapidly, his fingers moving across the keyboard with the urgency of someone having an important conversation that couldn't wait until morning. Then his phone started ringing. He looked at the caller ID, then at me, then back at the phone. His whole demeanor changed instantly. He looked guilty and caught off guard, like a kid who'd been found sneaking cookies before dinner. I need to take this, he said, walking quickly into his bedroom and closing the door behind him with more force than necessary. I couldn't make out specific words through the thin apartment walls, but I could hear his tone change completely. Softer, more intimate, with the kind of warmth and affection he used to reserve for conversations with me during our early dating years. It was the voice he'd used when he'd call me before bed during freshman year just to hear about my day, or when he'd leave me voicemails saying how much he missed me during winter break when we were apart for 3 weeks. When Alexander came back out 20 minutes later, he seemed rattled and on edge. He kept running his hands through his hair repeatedly, which was something he only did when he was genuinely anxious about something important. Who was that? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual and non-accusatory. My supervisor at the internship, Dr. Reynolds, had some questions about a project I'm working on, but Dr. Reynolds was a 60-year-old pharmaceutical executive, and Alexander had never spoken to any of his professors or supervisors with a tender, intimate tone I'd heard through his bedroom door. Plus, it was 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night. What kind of professional supervisor calls their intern at that hour for a casual conversation about work projects? Everyone said it wasn't a big deal when I mentioned my concerns to Madison and our friend group. College relationships go through rough patches during senior year when everyone's stressed about graduation and future plans, they assured me. You're just anxious about graduation, Madison told me while we were making dinner in our tiny kitchen. Senior year makes everyone paranoid about their relationships because there's so much uncertainty about what comes next. Our friend Maya agreed when I brought it up during study group. Remember how weird Jake got before he graduated last year? He kept picking fights with Stephanie about nothing because he was freaking out about starting his real career. Even my mom dismissed my concerns when I called her for advice. Honey, you've been together for 4 years. If there was something seriously wrong, you'd know by now. Alexander loves you. Anyone can see that when you two are together. But I did know something was wrong. I just didn't understand what it was or how serious the problem had become. The second thing that didn't make sense was Alexander's sudden financial upgrade during the spring semester. Alexander had always been extremely careful with money throughout college. His parents helped with tuition, but he worked at the campus bookstore and watched every dollar like most students do. We'd always split everything. Pizza, movies, gas money for family visits. He'd joke about being broke and calculate tips to exactly 15%. When we grocery shopped together, he'd compare unit prices, use coupons his mom mailed him, choose generic brands to save money. This never bothered me because I was equally budget conscious as a college student. Suddenly during spring semester, he was paying for expensive dinners at restaurants we'd never afforded before. He bought me a pearl necklace just because that cost more than his usual monthly budget. When I asked about the spending, he said the internship paid better than expected, and he wanted to spoil me before graduation. It felt generous, but completely out of character for someone who'd been meticulously budget conscious for 4 years. The necklace was genuinely beautiful, a delicate gold chain with a freshwater pearl that looked like something from an actual jewelry store. When I googled the brand later, I discovered it cost over $300, more than Alexander typically spent on me for birthday and Christmas combined. Where did you buy this? I asked over dinner at a restaurant that required reservations. There's a jewelry store downtown near my office. I walked by during lunch and saw it in the window. It reminded me of you. Alexander had never been the type to window shop, especially at expensive jewelry stores. The downtown area was the upscale business district where law firms and corporate headquarters were located, not where college students typically browsed luxury retail. Then came the night that changed everything between us. 2 weeks before graduation, Alexander asked if we could have dinner at Romano's, this upscale Italian restaurant off campus that we'd only been to once before, for my 21st birthday the previous year. He seemed nervous and distracted throughout the meal, fidgeting with his cloth napkin and barely touching the expensive entree he'd ordered. The restaurant had white tablecloths, servers wearing actual uniforms instead of t-shirts, and menu prices that started at $30 for pasta dishes. It was the kind of place where they brought you complimentary bread with olive oil for dipping, and the wine list had options that cost more per bottle than most college students spent on groceries in a month. Alexander kept checking his watch and glancing toward the restaurant entrance like he was expecting someone to walk in and interrupt our dinner. When I asked if he was waiting for someone or if we needed to be somewhere else by a certain time, he said no, but he continued seeming distracted and preoccupied. I've been thinking a lot about what comes next for us, he started, and my heart jumped with excitement because I thought he was going to propose. We talked about marriage before, about wanting to be engaged by the time we were 25, about building a life together that would last decades. Instead, he told me he thought we should take a break from our relationship after graduation. I love you so much, he said, reaching across the white tablecloth to take my hand in both of his, but I think we might want different things in life now, and long-distance relationships are really difficult to maintain. I don't want us to end up resenting each other. I felt like I'd been physically punched in the stomach. The expensive restaurant suddenly felt suffocating, and I could barely catch my breath. What different things? We've been planning Portland together for over a year. I know, and I'm sorry for being confusing about our plans, but my internship has shown me new possibilities for my career. There might be opportunities here that I can't pass up. What opportunities? I can find a job here too. I don't have to take the Portland position. That's not fair to ask of you, he said, but he wouldn't look directly at me anymore. You should follow your dreams and take the nonprofit job you're excited about. The conversation went in circles for 2 hours. Alexander kept saying he loved me, but that timing was everything in relationships, and maybe we'd find our way back to each other someday when our careers were more established. He made it sound mature and selfless, like he was setting me free to pursue my professional goals without the complications of maintaining a long-distance relationship. We're so young, he said. Maybe we need to experience life separately before we can really commit to each other. But we'd been experiencing life together for 4 years. We'd grown up together, learned how to be adults together, figured out who we were as individuals and as a couple through shared experiences. I cried for 3 days straight after that dinner. Madison held me while I sobbed into my pillow, convinced I'd somehow failed the love of my life. That if I'd been more supportive of his internship or more understanding about his schedule, maybe he wouldn't have realized we weren't compatible. Maybe he's right, I kept saying through endless tears. Maybe I was holding him back from better opportunities. Maybe I was being selfish, expecting him to prioritize our relationship over career advancement. Don't you dare blame yourself, Madison said firmly. If Alexander wanted different things, he should have been honest months ago instead of stringing you along with Portland plans he never intended to follow through on. but I couldn't shake the feeling I'd missed something crucial. Some sign that Alexander was outgrowing our college relationship and needed freedom to pursue bigger opportunities than what we'd planned together. We still had 2 weeks of school left, but Alexander became a ghost on campus. He'd nod politely if we passed each other, but the warmth was entirely gone from his eyes. Like 4 years of intimate history had been erased overnight. I tried giving him space, thinking maybe he needed time to process his own feelings about ending our relationship. But when I saw him laughing with friends at the campus center, he looked completely fine. Relieved even, like ending things had lifted some burden. At graduation, I spotted him from across the ceremony field, but he was sitting with well-dressed strangers who looked like they belonged at country clubs rather than college graduations. Expensive suits and jewelry that screamed generational wealth. When I tried catching his eye during the ceremony, hoping we could at least acknowledge each other on this important day, he looked right through me like I was a complete stranger. I moved to Portland as planned and threw myself into my nonprofit job. The work was fulfilling, but I spent evenings wondering what I could have done differently to prevent Alexander from realizing we weren't compatible. Madison visited me twice that first summer, and both times she found me stalking Alexander's social media profiles, looking desperately for clues about what career opportunities had been more important than our 4-year relationship. His Instagram had gone completely dark after graduation. No posts, no stories, nothing. His Facebook was equally silent, which was particularly strange because Alexander had always been active on social media throughout college. During our relationship, he'd posted photos of us constantly, study dates at the library, weekend trips to visit each other's families, random moments he thought were cute or funny or worth documenting. His social media had been like a digital scrapbook of our relationship, chronicling our growth from nervous freshmen to confident seniors ready to take on the world together. The sudden complete silence felt deliberate and suspicious, like he was intentionally hiding aspects of his new life that he didn't want me or our mutual college friends to discover. All I wanted was closure, and some understanding of why our relationship had ended so abruptly. Somehow that reasonable desire for answers turned into an obsessive investigation that consumed months of my mental energy. The first piece of concrete evidence was small but impossible to ignore. 3 months after graduation, I was scrolling through LinkedIn during my lunch break at the nonprofit when I saw that Alexander had updated his professional profile. He was now listed as Medical Research Associate at Reynolds Pharmaceuticals, which wasn't necessarily surprising since lots of successful interns get hired full-time. The detail that made me pause was that his profile stated he'd been in that position since January of our senior year. January was when Alexander had still been enthusiastically discussing medical school applications with me. January was when he was supposedly just a part-time intern learning about the pharmaceutical industry. But according to his professional profile, he'd been a full-time employee with a permanent position the entire spring semester. I screenshot the LinkedIn profile and sent it to Madison with a question mark emoji, not sure what to make of the discrepancy. Maybe he just backdated his start date for resume purposes? She texted back. People do that sometimes to make their career progression look more linear. Maybe that explanation made sense. But why would someone lie to their girlfriend of 4 years about being an intern when they were actually a full-time employee with a permanent position? And why keep that professional advancement secret from someone you were supposedly planning a future with? I started thinking back to all the conversations Alexander and I had had about his internship during the spring semester, how he'd always been vague about his specific responsibilities, how he'd seemed to have more scheduling flexibility than most interns typically get, how he'd been able to afford expensive dinners and gifts on what should have been an intern's limited salary. The timeline discrepancies were starting to paint a picture that made me uncomfortable, but I wasn't ready to jump to conclusions about what they might mean. The second piece of evidence made denial much more difficult to maintain. I was home visiting my parents for Labor Day weekend when I ran into Alexander's younger sister Abigail at our local grocery store. We'd always gotten along well during the years I'd been dating her brother, and seeing her felt like a bittersweet punch of nostalgia. "Oh my goodness, how are you doing?" she said, seeming genuinely happy and surprised to see me. "I was so shocked when Alexander told our family about you guys breaking up. We all thought you two were going to get married after graduation." We chatted for a few minutes about my new job in Portland and how I was adjusting to life in a different city. Abigail told me she was working as a teacher's aide while taking graduate school prerequisite courses, and I told her about the nonprofit work I was doing with at-risk teenagers. Then she mentioned something that made my blood freeze in my veins. "At least Alexander seems really happy with his new position at the company. Mom was so worried about him taking such a big step right out of college. But Daddy's company has been really good to our whole family over the years." "Daddy's company?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Yeah, Reynolds Pharmaceuticals. Daddy's been working there for like 15 years now. That's actually how Alexander was able to get his foot in the door in the first place." I tried to maintain a normal expression, but my mind was racing with new information that completely contradicted everything Alexander had told me about his internship and job prospects. Alexander had never mentioned that his father worked at Reynolds Pharmaceuticals. He'd made it sound like he'd gotten the internship purely through academic merit and his advisor's professional connections, not through family nepotism. "That's really great," I managed to say. "It's always nice when families can help each other out with career opportunities." "Well, you know how it is in the professional world. Sometimes it's not what you know, it's who you know," Abigail said with a laugh. "Plus, Dr. Reynolds' daughter seems to really like Alexander, so Mom thinks that might help his long-term career prospects at the company too." She said it so casually, like it was common family knowledge that everyone had been discussing. Like everyone knew that Alexander was developing some kind of relationship with his boss's daughter. Everyone except his girlfriend of 4 years, apparently. "Dr. Reynolds' daughter?" I asked, trying to sound mildly curious instead of increasingly panicked. "Victoria. She's really sweet, and she's been showing Alexander the ropes at the company since he started there full-time. Mom met her at the company picnic back in June and just gushed about how lovely and accomplished she was." June. Alexander and I had broken up in mid-May, which meant he'd been bringing someone new to family events within just a few weeks of ending our 4-year relationship. After Abigail walked away to continue her grocery shopping, I sat in my car in the parking lot for almost 30 minutes, trying to piece together the implications of what I'd just learned. Alexander's father worked at Reynolds Pharmaceuticals and had helped him get hired. Alexander had lied to me about how he'd obtained the position, claiming it was based on merit rather than family connections. And the CEO's daughter apparently really liked Alexander and had already been introduced to his family as someone significant in his life. None of this necessarily constituted cheating or betrayal, but it definitely represented major lies by omission, the kind of deception that reframes everything you thought you understood about your relationship and your partner's honesty. I called Madison from the grocery store parking lot, barely able to get the words out coherently. "His dad works at the pharmaceutical company," I said. "Alexander got the job because his father works there, not because of his grades or his advisor's recommendation. And there's apparently some woman, the boss's daughter, who likes him and has already met his family." "Okay, slow down and take a deep breath," Madison said. "That doesn't necessarily mean anything romantic was happening. Maybe his dad had just helped him get an interview, and maybe this Victoria person is just a colleague who's being friendly. Madison, he lied to me about how he got the position. That's a pretty significant thing to be dishonest about. And Abigail made it sound like this Victoria woman has been involved with Alexander for a while, not just recently. Did Abigail actually say they were dating, or are you reading romantic implications into what might just be a professional mentorship situation? She said Victoria really likes Alexander, and that it might help his career prospects. And she mentioned that his mom met Victoria at a company event in June, which was only a few weeks after he broke up with me. Maybe they're just friends, or maybe his family is reading more into a professional relationship than what's actually there. But even Madison sounded less convinced than usual, like she was starting to see that the timeline and circumstances were genuinely suspicious rather than products of my post-breakup paranoia. The third piece of evidence eliminated any remaining doubt I had about what had really happened during our senior year. When I returned to Portland from visiting my parents, I couldn't let go of my questions about Alexander's new life and career trajectory. I started researching Reynolds Pharmaceuticals online, trying to understand what kind of company he was working for, and what Dr. Reynolds' family situation looked like. Dr. Richard Reynolds was the founder and CEO of a mid-sized pharmaceutical company specializing in pediatric medications. The company website had an entire section dedicated to their commitment to family values and community involvement, featuring photos of Dr. Reynolds, his wife, and their daughter at various corporate events and charity galas. The daughter's name was Victoria Reynolds Hayes. She was 26 years old, had an MBA from Northwestern University, and worked as the company's director of strategic development. She was also absolutely stunning, with the kind of polished, sophisticated appearance that screamed generational wealth and elite education. Her LinkedIn profile was impressively comprehensive in a way that made my nonprofit job feel small and insignificant by comparison. She'd completed internships at Fortune 500 companies, had glowing recommendations from executives I'd actually heard of, and belonged to professional organizations that probably cost more to join than I made in several months. But what made me feel physically ill was discovering a photo from a company retreat that had taken place in March of our senior year. It was a group shot of all the Reynolds Pharmaceuticals employees at some luxury resort, probably costing more per night than most people spend on rent. I had to zoom in and scroll through several different versions of the photo before I found Alexander. But there he was, standing directly behind Victoria Reynolds Hayes with his hands resting on her shoulders. The photo was dated March 15th. Alexander and I had definitely been together in March. I'd spent that entire weekend at his apartment because I'd had a terrible stomach bug, and he'd taken care of me, bringing me soup and ginger ale while I recovered on his couch. A week after that caring, intimate weekend together, he was at company retreats with his hands on another woman's shoulders in ways that were unmistakably romantic and intimate rather than casually professional. The body language in the photo was impossible to misinterpret. The way Alexander was leaning into Victoria, the way she was tilting her head back toward him, the comfortable familiarity of their physical positioning. This wasn't the posture of colleagues or casual acquaintances. I screenshot the photo and spent the next several hours going through every company event photo I could find on Reynolds Pharmaceuticals website and social media accounts. Alexander appeared in multiple photos throughout the spring semester, always positioned near Victoria, always looking relaxed and comfortable in ways that suggested their relationship wasn't new or developing. In one photo from a charity gala in February, Alexander and Victoria were dancing together, her hand on his shoulder, both of them smiling at something off camera. In another photo from the company's holiday party, they were standing close together by the bar, both laughing and holding cocktails. The holiday party photo was dated December 15th. Alexander and I had been very much together in December. In fact, that specific weekend I'd been home with my family for winter break, and Alexander had said he was staying on campus to work on medical school applications and study for upcoming finals. Apparently, he'd been attending holiday parties with his future girlfriend, instead of doing any of the academic work he'd claimed was keeping him busy. That's when the social blowback started from people I trusted to support me. I called Madison, barely able to speak through my tears as I tried to explain what I'd discovered about Abigail, Dr. Reynolds' daughter, and the company photos that proved Alexander had been in an intimate relationship throughout our senior year. I think he was cheating on me for months, I said. I think he was planning his future with her while still pretending to plan Portland with me. Honey, you don't know that for certain, Madison said, but her tone had changed significantly. She sounded less dismissive than before, more willing to consider that my concerns might be legitimate. Maybe they're just close friends. Maybe the photos look more intimate than the relationship actually was. You don't put your hands on a friend's shoulders like that at work retreats. You don't dance with colleagues at charity galas when you have a serious girlfriend at home. These photos show obvious romantic intimacy. Okay, but even if something was going on between them, it's over now regardless. You guys broke up months ago. Maybe it's time to focus on moving forward instead of digging deeper into Alexander's personal life. But I couldn't move forward when I felt like my entire senior year had been an elaborate performance, designed to hide the fact that my boyfriend was building a future with someone else, when the person I trusted most in the world had been systematically lying to me about the most fundamental aspects of his life and priorities. People I'd counted on for emotional support started treating me like I was being irrational and obsessive about a college relationship that had run its natural course. Madison thought I was making romantic connections that weren't necessarily there because I was hurt and jealous about Alexander moving on with someone who was obviously wealthier and more professionally accomplished than I was. My mom was even worse when I tried to explain the timeline discrepancies and photographic evidence I'd uncovered. You need to accept that Alexander has moved on with his life. Calling his new relationship cheating isn't going to change anything, and it's not going to help you heal from the breakup. I'm not trying to get him back. I'm trying to understand what actually happened to me during our senior year. What happened is that you had a college relationship that ran its natural course. That's completely normal and healthy. Mom, he was dancing with her at company parties in December while still making Portland plans with me in January. He was at work retreats with her in March while I was taking care of him during his stomach flu. You don't know that those photos mean what you think they mean. You're reading romantic implications into workplace interactions because you're hurt about the breakup. No one wanted to believe that Alexander had been systematically lying and potentially cheating throughout our senior year. It was much easier to characterize me as a bitter ex-girlfriend who couldn't accept that her college boyfriend had found someone new and better. But I knew what I'd seen in those photos, and I knew the timeline didn't add up to innocent workplace friendships and coincidental career opportunities. My friends in Portland tried to be supportive, but they didn't really understand the situation because they'd never met Alexander, didn't know our relationship history, and couldn't grasp why I was so focused on proving my ex had been dishonest. Even if Alexander was cheating, my friend Jordan said during drinks one evening, what difference does it make now? You're better off without him either way. It makes a difference to me, I said. It makes a difference to know whether I was completely delusional for 4 years or whether my instincts about something being wrong were actually correct. Now it wasn't just about heartbreak and disappointment. It was about my sanity and my ability to trust my own own judgment in future relationships. I started questioning everything about our 4 years together. Had any of Alexander's affection and future planning been genuine? When he told me he loved me, was he mentally comparing me to Victoria? When we made Portland plans, did he already know he was never going to follow through because he'd committed his future to someone else? The worst part was wondering whether Victoria had known about me throughout their relationship, whether she'd known she was involved with someone who had a serious girlfriend, or whether Alexander had lied to her about his relationship status, the same way he'd lied to me about everything else. I couldn't eat properly or sleep through the night. My work performance started suffering because I was constantly distracted and emotionally exhausted. The new city that was supposed to represent my independence and professional growth felt lonely and hollow. I was spending hundreds of dollars on therapy sessions trying to understand why I felt so fundamentally broken when everyone kept insisting this was just normal breakup pain that would fade with time. But I wasn't mourning the end of our relationship. I was mourning the realization that 4 years of my life had been built on systematic deception and manipulation. The panic attacks started around this time. Real medical panic attacks where I couldn't breathe properly, and my vision would go blurry, and I was convinced something was seriously wrong with my physical health. They always happened when I was alone, usually late at night when my brain wouldn't stop spinning through everything I'd discovered and all the lies I'd apparently been told. The attacks terrified me more than the heartbreak did. I'd never experienced anxiety like that before in my life, but when you discover that someone you trusted completely was living an elaborate double life, it fundamentally damages your ability to trust your own perceptions and judgment. If I'd been that completely wrong about Alexander after 4 years of intimate daily contact, what else was I wrong about? How could I ever trust another romantic partner when I'd been so thoroughly fooled by someone I'd known since we were 18 years old? That's when I decided I needed to know the complete truth about what had happened, regardless of what it might cost me emotionally or socially. After that, everything shifted when I found the one piece of evidence I wasn't supposed to see. I'd been carefully avoiding Alexander's social media and trying not to obsess over his new life, but my college friend Brittany kept sending me occasional updates about what was happening with our mutual friends and acquaintances. She didn't intend to torture me with information. She thought I should know what was going on so I wouldn't be blindsided if someone else mentioned Alexander's developments. One evening in late fall, Brittany called me with news that made everything click into place with horrible clarity. I probably shouldn't tell you this, she said, but I thought you should hear it from a friend instead of finding out accidentally through social media. Alexander is engaged. The words hit me like a physical blow to my chest. What did you say? Abigail posted an announcement on Facebook earlier today. She's really excited about getting a new sister-in-law. Apparently the engagement party is happening next weekend. I felt like the entire world had shifted sideways. Who is he engaged to? Someone named Victoria. She looks like she stepped out of a fashion magazine or something. Very sophisticated and expensive looking. Brittany sent me screenshots of Abigail's Facebook announcement a few minutes later. There was Alexander, looking happier and more content than I'd ever seen him in 4 years of dating, with his arm around a woman who looked like she belonged in luxury lifestyle magazines. The caption read, "So excited to welcome Victoria to our family. Alexander picked an amazing woman and I can't wait for the engagement party next weekend." The post had dozens of comments from family, friends, and relatives, all congratulating Alexander and commenting on what a beautiful, perfect couple he and Victoria made together. But what absolutely destroyed me emotionally was finding Victoria's own Instagram post about their engagement announcement. I'd been avoiding her social media profiles for months, but Brittany's screenshots led me directly to her account, and what I discovered there made me sit on my bathroom floor crying until I physically couldn't produce any more tears. Celebrating 2 years with my best friend and soulmate. Can't wait to spend forever with you, Em. Here's to the next chapter of our beautiful love story. 2 years. Alexander and I had broken up only 6 months earlier. If Victoria was publicly celebrating 2 years with him, that meant their relationship had started during the fall semester of our junior year, more than a year before Alexander broke up with me. 2 years meant that everything about our entire senior year had been an elaborate performance designed to hide the fact that Alexander was building his real future with someone else. 2 years meant that when Alexander was telling me I was his soulmate and his person, he was probably using the exact same language with Victoria behind my back. 2 years meant that our Portland plans had never been genuine, because Alexander had already committed his post-graduation life to a woman whose father could guarantee his career success in ways I never could. 2 years meant that while I'd been stressing about our relationship and wondering why Alexander seemed distant and distracted, he'd been actively planning a completely different life with another woman. But 2 years also meant that Victoria might not have known about me either during most of their relationship. If she genuinely believed they'd been together for 2 years, and Alexander had told me we were together until May, then either Victoria was lying about their timeline, or Alexander had been systematically deceiving both of us. I went in calmer than I felt when I finally decided to confront the situation directly and get answers to questions that had been consuming my mental energy for months. I spent the 6-hour drive from Portland back to our college town practicing what I wanted to say to the people who might be willing to fill in the gaps in my understanding of what had actually happened during our senior year. Not to Alexander. His months of silence had already told me everything I needed to know about his character and his willingness to be honest about his behavior. But to people like Abigail and potentially even Victoria herself, who might be willing to help me understand the complete timeline of events, I'd called ahead and made plans to visit a few old college friends, using the excuse that I was coming back for homecoming weekend festivities. It wasn't technically a lie. Homecoming was that weekend, but I had zero intention of attending any of the official university events. I started with Abigail, hoping that Alexander's sister might be willing to help me understand what had really happened and when various relationship developments had occurred. I found her working the evening shift at a coffee shop where she had a part-time job during college, now managing the place while she completed graduate school applications in education. She seemed genuinely happy and surprised to see me, which made what I needed to ask her even more difficult than I'd anticipated. We spent a few minutes catching up on normal topics. She told me about her plans for graduate school and her hopes of becoming a high school history teacher. I told her about Portland and my work with at-risk teenagers, trying to delay the real conversation I needed to have. Finally, I took a deep breath and decided to ask the direct question I'd driven 6 hours to get answered. I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me because I think I deserve to know the truth, I said. How long has Alexander actually been in a relationship with Victoria? Abigail's friendly smile faded immediately. She looked around the coffee shop like she was hoping other customers would interrupt our conversation and save her from having to answer. Why would you ask me something like that? Because Victoria posted on social media that they've been together for 2 years, and Alexander and I only broke up 6 months ago. The math doesn't work unless he was cheating on me throughout our senior year. Abigail was quiet for what felt like several minutes, wiping down the same section of counter over and over again with a dish towel. I can't speak to exactly when things started between Alexander and Victoria, she finally said, but I know Alexander has been talking about her since he started working at the pharmaceutical company, and I know Dad was really excited when he realized Alexander and Victoria were getting close, because it could be really beneficial for Alexander's long-term career prospects. When did Alexander really start working there full-time? Not as an intern, but as an actual employee with a permanent position? I think it was January, maybe late December. Dad helped him get the position after Alexander talked to him about wanting to go straight into the pharmaceutical industry instead of pursuing medical school. Alexander told me he was still planning on medical school applications until right before we graduated. Abigail's face crumpled with obvious guilt and discomfort. I'm really sorry. I thought you knew about his change in career plans. I thought that's part of why you guys decided to break up. What exactly did you think I knew? About Victoria? About how serious Alexander was getting with her? About his decision to build his career at Reynolds Pharmaceuticals instead of going to medical school? Alexander brought Victoria to Sunday dinner at our parents' house back in April. Mom absolutely loved her immediately. She kept talking about what a positive influence Victoria was on Alexander, how she was helping him think more strategically about his professional future. April. Alexander had been bringing Victoria to family dinners in April while still enthusiastically making Portland plans with me and talking about our shared future. Did your parents know Alexander and I were still together when he started bringing Victoria to family events? Abigail looked absolutely miserable. I think they assumed you guys had broken up when Alexander started bringing Victoria around to family gatherings. When I mentioned you once during dinner, Mom said something about how it was good that Alexander was moving on from his college girlfriend and focusing on more mature relationship goals. It was the closest thing to a direct confession about the timeline that I was going to get from anyone in Alexander's family. But I needed to hear the truth from someone who had been directly involved in the situation, rather than just observing it from the outside. I led with the simplest, most direct truth when I finally managed to track down Victoria Reynolds Hayes herself. I'd found her Instagram handle through her company bio on the Reynolds Pharmaceuticals website, and she'd posted about having coffee at a trendy downtown place that Saturday morning. Based on her aesthetic preferences and the background visible in her photos, it wasn't difficult to figure out which specific trendy coffee place she was likely to choose. I spotted her immediately when I walked into the cafe. She was even more stunning in person than in her professional photos, with the kind of effortless elegance and sophisticated style that comes from never having to worry about money or wonder whether you can afford the things you want. She was sitting alone at a corner table, scrolling through her phone with a large iced coffee and an expensive-looking pastry she hadn't touched yet. Everything about Victoria screamed wealth, education, and social connections. Her handbag probably cost more than I made in 2 or 3 months at the nonprofit. Her jewelry was delicate and clearly expensive. Even her casual weekend outfit looked like it came from boutique stores rather than department stores or online retailers. I walked over to her table, my heart pounding so loudly I was convinced she could hear it from several feet away. Victoria, I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm Brooke, Alexander's ex-girlfriend. I was wondering if we could talk for just a few minutes. She looked up at me with perfectly applied makeup and an expression I couldn't immediately read. I know who you are, she said quietly. That response stopped me completely in my tracks. You do? Alexander told me about you. He mentioned that you two had dated during college. I sat down in the chair across from her without waiting for an invitation. Did he tell you we dated until this past May? That we were together for 4 years and were planning to move in together after graduation? Victoria's face went visibly pale. She set down her coffee cup and stared directly at me. He told me you guys had broken up during junior year, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He said it was amicable but that you'd stayed friends after the breakup. He also said you were dating someone new and seemed really happy. I pulled out my phone and showed her some of the screenshots I'd saved over the past few months. Photos of Alexander and me together from spring semester, including one from March where we were clearly together as a happy couple at a friend's birthday party. This was taken a week before that company retreat where you and Alexander looked pretty romantic together in the group photo I found on your website. Victoria stared at the photos on my phone screen for a long time. When she finally looked back up at me, there were genuine tears in her eyes. I would never have gotten involved with Alexander if I'd known he was still in a serious relationship with someone else. My parents raised me to have better moral standards than that. How long have you and Alexander actually been together? We started talking casually in January when he joined the company as a full-time employee. We went on our first official date in February, but Alexander told me he'd been single for over a year and was ready to start building something serious with the right person. Alexander and I were together until May 15th. We had the official breakup conversation on May 15th, exactly 2 weeks before graduation. Victoria put her head in her hands. Oh my god, I helped him cheat on you for months. I had absolutely no idea. For the first time in many months, I felt like someone actually believed what I was telling them. Someone else could see that the timeline didn't make sense, that Alexander had been systematically lying to multiple people, and that my concerns weren't just jealousy or post-breakup paranoia. I'm not telling you this to try to ruin your engagement, I said. I just needed someone else to acknowledge that what happened to me was real, that I wasn't completely delusional for thinking something was wrong during our senior year. You definitely weren't delusional, Victoria said firmly, and I need to have a very serious conversation with my fiancé about honesty, respect, and the foundation of our relationship. We ended up talking for another hour and a half. Victoria filled in details about Alexander's career trajectory at Reynolds Pharmaceuticals, how her father had fast-tracked his promotion and given him access to opportunities that would normally take years to earn, and how Alexander had been discussing marriage and family planning almost from the very beginning of their relationship. Alexander was so charming and focused when we first started getting to know each other, Victoria said. He seemed different from the other men I dated, more genuine, more interested in building something substantial for the long term. He talked constantly about wanting to find the right person to build a real life with, about being ready to settle down and start planning for the future. She also told me something that made my stomach turn with a mixture of anger and vindication. Alexander talks about you sometimes, she said. He refers to you as his biggest regret from college. He says he wishes things could have ended differently between you two, but that ultimately you wanted different things from life and the relationship. He's still telling people that lie. Apparently so, even to me, and I'm supposed to be the person he's planning to marry. Victoria explained that Alexander had presented our breakup as completely mutual and inevitable, something that had happened after mature conversations about our incompatible life goals. He told her that we'd grown apart during senior year, that I'd become increasingly focused on my career ambitions while he'd realized he wanted different things from a long-term partner. He made you sound really ambitious and career-driven, Victoria said, like you were the one who prioritized professional success over relationship commitment. It was a masterful revision of history. Alexander had taken the actual truth, that he'd chosen his career advancement and financial security over our relationship, and completely flipped it to make me the villain in our story. That's not what happened at all, I said. I would have given up the Portland job offer to stay here with him. I would have supported whatever career path he chose, including pharmaceutical work instead of medical school. He's the one who chose his professional prospects over our relationship. Specifically, he chose your father's company. company and the opportunities that came with dating the CEO's daughter. Victoria looked genuinely sick to her stomach. Are you telling me he pursued a relationship with me primarily for career advancement? I think Alexander pursued you for multiple reasons, and I'm sure his feelings for you are genuine in their own way. But I don't think it's a coincidence that he fell in love with his boss's daughter right around the time he decided he didn't want to be a financially struggling medical student anymore. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a few minutes, both of us processing the implications of everything we'd learned and shared. I feel so incredibly stupid, Victoria finally said. I thought I was special to him. I thought he chose me because he genuinely loved who I am as a person. You are special, I said, and I meant it sincerely. And Alexander probably does love you in whatever way he's capable of loving someone. But he also clearly chose you because being with you comes with professional and financial benefits that being with me could never have provided. When I left the coffee shop, Victoria was making what sounded like a very tense phone call. I couldn't hear the specific words she was saying, but her tone was sharp and angry, and I got the impression she was confronting someone about serious lies they told her. I never found out exactly what happened between Victoria and Alexander immediately after our conversation, but I didn't really need those details to feel satisfied that I'd finally gotten the validation and answers I'd been seeking. It didn't look like TV justice with dramatic confrontations and perfect revenge, but here's what actually changed over the following weeks and months. 3 days after my conversation with Victoria, Alexander finally responded to multiple messages I'd sent him months earlier, asking for honest explanations about our relationship and breakup. It was a very long text message, full of apologies and partial explanations that didn't quite explain anything substantial. He said he'd been confused about what he wanted during our senior year, that he'd never intended to hurt me, and that the situation had gotten more complicated than he'd known how to handle at the time. He claimed that his feelings for Victoria had developed gradually and naturally, and that he'd broken up with me as soon as he realized he wasn't being emotionally fair to either of us. He said he'd wanted to tell me the complete truth about his changing feelings, but hadn't known how to have that conversation without causing me unnecessary pain. Alexander didn't admit to deliberate cheating or systematic deception, but he did acknowledge that the timeline of events had been messy and poorly handled, and that he should have been much more honest with me about his evolving feelings and career priorities. I know I hurt you badly, he wrote in the final paragraph, and I know I handled everything completely wrong. You deserved so much better from me, and I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to be honest with you when it would have mattered. It wasn't the full confession I'd been hoping for, but it was clear validation that my instincts during our senior year had been completely correct. The red flags I'd noticed were real warning signs, not products of my imagination or insecurity. More importantly, other people started believing me and acknowledging that my concerns had been legitimate all along. Madison called to apologize for dismissing my worries and suspicions for so many months. I should have trusted your judgment from the beginning, she said. I was so focused on trying to help you move on from the breakup that I didn't really listen to what you were trying to tell me about the timeline and evidence you'd found. Abigail sent me a long message saying she was sorry for not speaking up sooner about what she'd known regarding Alexander and Victoria's relationship. She said she suspected something wasn't right about the timing, but hadn't wanted to get involved in family drama. I should have told you about Victoria when I saw you at the grocery store, she wrote. I knew the timeline didn't make sense, but I didn't want to be the person responsible for delivering bad news to someone who'd already been hurt. Even my mom admitted that the timeline and evidence I'd uncovered was genuinely suspicious, and that she was proud of me for trusting my intuition and fighting for the truth despite social pressure to just move on. Brittany told me that Victoria had broken off her engagement to Alexander approximately 2 weeks after our coffee shop conversation. Apparently, Victoria had hired a private investigator to look more deeply into Alexander's past relationships and personal history, and she discovered several other significant lies he told her about his romantic history and career motivations. She wanted to make sure there weren't any other major surprises about Alexander's character before she committed to marrying him, Brittany explained during one of our phone conversations. Apparently, the investigator found enough additional red flags that she decided she couldn't trust him as a life partner. According to Abigail, Alexander was absolutely devastated by the end of his engagement. He'd lost both his fiancée and his fast-track career path at Reynolds Pharmaceuticals, since Dr. Reynolds had not taken kindly to learning that his future son-in-law had been systematically dishonest with his daughter. Reynolds Pharmaceuticals let Alexander go, Abigail told me during a phone call. Not officially because of the personal drama, but they found professional reasons to terminate his employment. Apparently, Victoria told her parents everything about what she'd learned, and they didn't want him associated with the family business anymore. Alexander has been calling me crying almost every day, Abigail continued. He keeps saying he made the biggest mistake of his entire life, that he threw away everything good and meaningful for something that wasn't even real. I wish I could say I felt sorry for Alexander and the consequences he was experiencing, but honestly I didn't. He made deliberate choices about how to treat people throughout our senior year, and consequences are just choices coming home to roost. The real victory for me wasn't that Alexander had gotten his comeuppance. It was that I'd finally gotten my sanity and self-confidence back after months of questioning my own memory and judgment. For the better part of a year, I'd been told by multiple people that I was being dramatic, jealous, and obsessive about a college relationship that had simply run its natural course. I'd started to believe that maybe I was making mountains out of molehills, that maybe I needed to just accept that college relationships end and focus on moving forward with my adult life. But I'd been absolutely right all along about everything. My relationship had ended because of systematic lies and emotional betrayal, not because Alexander and I had naturally grown apart or developed incompatible life goals. The red flags I'd noticed throughout our senior year were genuine warning signs, not paranoid fantasies created by my insecurity. That validation changed everything about how I felt about myself and my ability to trust my own perceptions. I stopped having panic attacks for the first time in months. I stopped questioning every decision I'd made during our 4-year relationship. I stopped wondering whether I'd somehow driven Alexander away or failed to be the kind of girlfriend he needed and deserved. Instead, I started channeling my emotional energy in much more productive directions. I threw myself into my work at the nonprofit with renewed focus and passion. I started developing new program initiatives for teenagers dealing with family dysfunction and emotional manipulation, drawing from my own recent experience with gaslighting and psychological manipulation. It felt deeply meaningful to help young people recognize unhealthy relationship patterns and develop stronger personal boundaries with family members and romantic partners, teaching them that their feelings and perceptions were valid, that they should trust their instincts when something felt wrong, even when adults around them were insisting everything was fine. I also started attending therapy specifically focused on trust issues and healthy boundary setting in relationships, not because I was fundamentally broken by what Alexander had done, but because I wanted to make sure I never ignored obvious red flags again in future romantic relationships. Here's how my life looks now, 3 years after everything happened. I'm still living in Portland, but I've been promoted twice at the nonprofit, and I'm now the director of our youth advocacy program. I genuinely love my job, my coworkers, and the city I get to call home. The program I developed for teenagers dealing with emotional manipulation and family dysfunction has helped over 200 young people recognize unhealthy relationship patterns and develop stronger personal boundaries. It's become a model that other organizations across the country have adopted and adapted for their own communities. I've been in a relationship with someone new for over a year now, a social worker named Aaron who's refreshingly honest about everything, even completely boring details of his daily life. He tells me about his day at work without me having to ask probing questions, introduces me to his colleagues and friends from the very beginning, and includes me in his future planning from the start of our relationship. Our relationship feels completely different from what I experienced with Alexander. And not just because Aaron isn't systematically lying to me about major aspects of his life. It's different because I trust my own instincts now. I know what red flags look like, and I know that my gut feelings about people and situations are worth paying attention to. Aaron knows the complete story about Alexander and Victoria and everything I went through to discover the truth. I told him everything on our third date because I wanted him to understand why I might sometimes seem hyper-vigilant about honesty and communication in relationships. Instead of being scared away by my baggage, Aaron appreciated my directness and made it clear that transparency and open communication were equally important to him. I never want you to wonder what I'm thinking or what I'm doing, he told me early in our relationship. That's not love, that's anxiety, and you deserve better than that. I don't obsess over Alexander's social media anymore, or seek out information about his current life, but Brittany occasionally gives me updates about the family drama and long-term consequences he's still dealing with. Apparently Alexander is working at a different pharmaceutical company now, for significantly less money and with much fewer advancement opportunities than what he'd had at Reynolds Pharmaceuticals. According to Abigail, he's been dating someone new but having serious trust and commitment issues that are affecting his ability to build healthy relationships. Alexander keeps talking about how hard it is to find someone genuine and trustworthy. Abigail told me during one of our occasional phone conversations, it's like he doesn't realize that he's the one who created trust problems in his romantic relationships through his own dishonesty. Victoria, meanwhile, got engaged to someone else, a lawyer she'd known from her Northwestern MBA program, who her family apparently adores. From what I can tell through our mutual social media connections, she learned important lessons from her experience with Alexander and made sure to thoroughly investigate her new partner's background and relationship history before making any long-term commitments. I'm genuinely happy for Victoria and glad she found someone who deserves her trust and commitment. She got manipulated and deceived just like I did, and she deserves a partner who won't lie to her about fundamental facts of their relationship. Victoria actually reached out to me about a year after everything happened, sending me a thoughtful message apologizing again for her unknowing role in Alexander's deception and thanking me for having the courage to tell her the truth about the timeline. I learned so much about myself from that whole experience, she wrote. About the importance of asking direct questions instead of just accepting someone's version of their past. About doing my own research instead of just taking someone's word about their history. I think you might have saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. We're not close friends, that would be too weird given our shared history, but we follow each other on social media and occasionally like each other's posts. It's a strange kind of solidarity, but it works for both of us. As for me, I've learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do for yourself is trust your own perceptions when everyone around you is telling you to let things go. The people who encouraged me to move on and stop being dramatic about Alexander's behavior weren't necessarily trying to hurt me. They were probably trying to protect me from additional pain. Or maybe they were just uncomfortable with the messiness of betrayal and deception. But sometimes the only way to get through emotional pain is to go straight through it, rather than around it. Sometimes you have to be willing to look obsessive or bitter or crazy in order to fight for the truth about what happened to you. And sometimes the truth is exactly what you suspected all along, even when everyone around you is insisting you're wrong and should just move on. I still work with teenagers who are dealing with gaslighting and emotional manipulation in their family relationships and romantic situations. One of the very first things I tell them is that their feelings and perceptions matter, that they should trust their instincts when something feels wrong, even if the adults around them are saying everything is perfectly fine. Trust your gut instincts, I tell them regularly. They're usually right, even when your brain is trying to rationalize away the red flags because you want to believe the best about people you care about. I wish someone had told me that during my senior year of college. I wish I'd trusted my instincts about Alexander's increasing secretiveness instead of making excuses for behavior that I knew didn't feel right. But I also know that I had to go through that entire experience to become the person I am today. Someone who values honesty over comfort, who asks direct questions even when they're uncomfortable, who won't ignore red flags just because it's easier than confronting difficult truths about people I care about. Alexander taught me what love isn't supposed to look like. Aaron is teaching me what healthy love actually looks like in practice. And Victoria taught me that sometimes the person you initially think is your enemy is actually just another victim of the same lies and manipulation. The most surprising thing about this whole experience is that I'm genuinely grateful for it now. Not grateful that it happened, because it was genuinely painful and traumatic, but grateful for what it taught me about myself, about relationships, and about the importance of fighting for truth even when it's inconvenient. I know how to recognize emotional manipulation now. I know the difference between someone who's genuinely busy with work responsibilities and someone who's hiding important aspects of their life. I know that healthy relationships require transparency and honesty, not just passion and chemistry. Most importantly, I know that I'm the kind of person who will fight for the truth about what happened to me, even when it's painful and even when everyone around me is telling me to let things go and move on. He told me I wasn't the kind of person worth being completely honest with. Turns out I'm exactly the kind of person worth fighting for the truth.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and drop your favorite part in the comments. See you in the next one.